Okay, everyone, how are you? My name's Bron Martin, and as I mentioned, my lovely colleague Kate from Beechworth, who I work with, some of what is presented today is her work, and we've worked collaboratively on it. Some of what I'm presenting today really extends over my 4-year deep investigation into catering for high ability learners and trying to build cultures where all teachers interrogate what they do and consider layers of improvement. And the end goal is that we end up with a team of teachers that practice reflective practice, that's a bit of a mouthful, thinking about the interventions they layer in to establish deeper learning opportunities for the high ability learners they work with, and also introducing to the high ability learners the benefits and pros of them practicing reflective practice themselves. So I hope you find it interesting. Framing kind of experiences for me towards my journey with this work really included participating in the Teaching Excellence Program in 2023, and also actually participating 2 years ago in the Deakin PL for high ability leaders. I came and did that here. And I've been really fortunate within my role as being a co-leader of the VHAB English team. I've had a lot of great opportunity with professional learning with people like John Munro, and I've also really tapped into the opportunities provided by chairs, particularly Morgan Whitfield's earlier webinar this year, which I'll be talking to too. So it's kind of an ongoing passion about trying to do the job well and listening to advice and then trying to work out ways to practice it. So I hope you get something out of it. And 3 times during the presentation, I'll be stopping for you to reflect and think about your context and think about what I've presented to you or the combined work with me and Kate have presented, and thinking about, well, how might I use this in my setting? And what I'm really hoping is collectively we make a Padlet and we have everybody's ideas that then everyone continues to have access to. So we like, one of the things I always say to the kids when they're all shy about sharing stuff and they don't want anyone but the teacher to see it, I say, we all know what's in our head, okay? If we're open to sharing and if we're open to listening and if we're open to applauding what other people are doing, we, hugely expand our understanding of how to go about things. And that's all, the power of collaboration, and it's the power of developing comfort in sharing ideas and giving and receiving feedback. And that's really what I'm on about with this workshop. So I've just I won't read this slide to you, but if you could just take a second to read this. I've kind of aligned what I'm doing to Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. So I'll just give you a moment to kind of get your head around what I'm doing. And then the samples, as I said, it's a range of samples over numerous years of work. And some of the samples are taken from me as a teacher. Some of the samples are taken from Kate as a teacher. Certainly the third part of the program is from me as a leader, my work as me as a leader. And everything that's presented today has a frame of being informed by academic research with a recommendation that this should work. And then it's about me taking that message from the academic and thinking about, well, what might be the possibility to do this in practice? What might that look like? And because Kate and I teach English, the examples of us working with the kids are from teaching English. Okay, so the first part, the presentation's in 3 sections. And the first part, the first 15 minutes, and I was actually going to put my timer on so I don't go over time. Just excuse me a minute with each section. So the first 15 minutes, I'm going to be talking about trying to develop cultures of critique within your classes and comfort with that, rather than it being like pulling teeth, or rather than it just being 2 words, good job, and actually not much meaningful feedback's given. And really the stem for this work for me came from my participation in TEP. And particularly, we worked very closely during the 2023 TEP year with this text by Sonia Thompson, An Ethic of Excellence. And that being the way that I am, I tend to get little books like this and I read the whole thing. And then I remember the bits that really resonated with me, and I go back and I try to design projects around bringing this to life. And so I'll just let you read the key page that I set as my challenge for my work with the kids. So there's a reference to Austin's Butterfly and Ron Berger. If this piques your interest, I would recommend after this session, you Google Ron Berger and you look at his, you can either find reference to his book, Ethic of Excellence, or even just Google Austin's Butterfly and you'll find clips of him talking about the power of feedback with young kids drawing a butterfly. But I'm not going to play that for you now in the interest of time. The thing I decided to focus on from this advice in this book, we had issues in VHAP English, particularly in our secondary program, with getting kids to share, getting kids to be comfortable answering questions, getting kids to be comfortable, sometimes even uploading work. And I saw it as a problem of practice with how do we get more active engagement with our kids and greater comfort with them, because we know there's a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of, we work with the kids one day a week for 1 hour. So they didn't know me super well, but I was just trying to kind of develop, this is the way we do things. This is our culture within the class. And this is, success for us is everybody learning, everybody getting better, okay? And we all will end up much better if we learn from each other. And so that was the challenge I set myself. And what I set out to do was to establish a culture where we gave kind, specific and helpful feedback, and where we also learned to receive feedback without having our feelings hurt, without being intimidated, and actually learn that the power of feedback is when we listen and we reflect and we revise. And I also put the rider to the kids, but this is your piece of work. This is your creativity, and you can disagree with the feedback. So if you don't like the feedback and you've got a good rationale, you don't necessarily have to do it. But we've all got blind spots, and the person looking at your work might, point out stuff to you. Plus, they're going to be applauding a lot of what you've already done. And so I'm just going to take you through quickly the steps of doing it. So initially, you don't need to read. I know I grappled with the science of learning research around don't have anything on the slide versus you're working with English and they write. You don't actually need to read the examples. The key thing you need to read is the box, okay? So initially, I explicitly taught. Okay, we're talking, these are the reasons, this is the why. I went, use the Simon Sinek framework about the why and the how. Okay, we're going to do kind, specific and helpful feedback. I tried to set it up from the second week of the program. Initially, I modelled it and I set it out explicitly so they could see what it looked like. Then I got the kids to basically follow the model. Read the student work sample, follow the model. And I went so far to say, Fred, you're giving feedback to Sally. Sally, you're giving feedback to Michael. So you didn't end up with Fred getting 16 pieces of feedback and poor Sally at the end, no one giving Sally any feedback. So I was very explicit trying to get, this is how it works. This is how we don't leave anyone out. This is how everybody gets some kind of specific and helpful feedback. And then, you know, through that process, I then worked with the kids and said, okay, look at what people said to you. Look at what I said to you. Look at what the student said to you. Decide what you want to do with it. Have a go to write a bit more. And they layered in more writing or editing of their work. As kids understood the process, and I no longer had to explicitly teach, this is how we do it. Sometimes the subheadings dissolve because they have the sentence stems. I like, the part where you, okay, have you thought of, or something that might make it better might be. Then I moved to kind of more sophisticated systems. So we had the work sample from one student. We had a designated student, so say this is Fred's work sample. Sally, you're giving Fred some feedback. And then, instead of the teacher feedback coming first, I did the teacher feedback afterwards. So I gave Fred some feedback also. So they weren't feeling like I only got feedback from Sally, although by the end of this process, they're like the feedback from the kids is just as good as feedback from the teacher, and I've really learned how much they can teach me, but they weren't quite at that point yet. But then I also gave Sally feedback on her feedback. So I was recognising what both of them had done in the system, trying to develop confidence, trying to develop comfort with this process. And then another layer of analysis and helping the kids understand how to do this was to also kind of align what you're giving feedback on. So here's Fred's piece of work. Sally's actually, this bit of feedback from Sally is referencing the top half of the paragraph. This bit of feedback from Sally is referencing the middle, and that's referencing the yellow bit. I then also, the green bit is my feedback to them, or where, you know, Sally's saying, have you thought of? So that's helpful taking it further. So I zoned in on the specific, and when you're giving feedback, you're looking at specific things. And so then I was kind of pointing out to the kids, look how well you did this. You covered the whole paragraph with what you were talking about. Well done. And then, because, you know, naturally I'm a bit of a researcher, and naturally I'm incredibly curious about whether or not what I'm doing is having impact and is actually working. Then at the end of the unit, I collected feedback from the kids, which is, you know, built into the way we teach VHAP. We always have student evaluations and things at the end. But then I analysed the student feedback, wondering, with my goal I set out for, to develop the students' comfort with and knowledge how to give kind, specific and feedback had I achieved that goal. So then I kind of made notes to myself, looking for, you know, given my goal that I set out to with teaching this unit of work and explicitly teaching the process of giving and receiving feedback and the value of doing that, I then kind of made notes to myself. And all this green highlighting is affirmative comments from the kids, you know, saying stuff. I'm not going to read them all to you, but basically referring to the fact that I've realised that when kids talk about your work, they're not judging you. You know, it can be really good. And I've also realised how well everyone writes. Whereas when they keep their work private, they don't see what other people do. And so they're learning from that too. And then that sets up my next kind of focus. That, you know, what they're telling me, what I'm seeing with their work samples, that then sets up my next challenge as a teacher of what am I going to zoom in on next. Okay, so now we're at the Padlet. From that little section in section 1, what I'd love you all to do, please, is to get into the section that says how might you try or similar approach. you need to press the little plus next to the heading, establishing cultures of critique, and add a few ideas that you have for your setting, how you could or might, or how you might modify what I've done, how you think that might work with the cohorts at your school. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then I'd love 1 or 2 people to actually just share what they put on the Padlet.
How do I get to that Padlet? So
It's in, have you got the folder from Sarah?
yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. The chess conference.
Yeah.
The
Right.
conference resources, and then we've got to go down to my name. Here we go.
That's what I'm saying.
There we go.
I mean, good.
No worries.
Thank you.
Okay, have we got anybody either online or in the room who would love to share what they just typed into the Padlet? We'll just get 2 people to share.
My name's Jason. I'm a primary school teacher and a learning specialist, and I just put in the Padlet, well, just asking for a name. We've been recently doing narrative writing, so they'll be able to actually read each other's stories as a starting point, maybe the introduction, and give feedback on the introductions around language use or, a tone or author's voice or something. So yeah, I think it'd be really powerful actually.
Yeah, and particularly, I mean, you're making a really important point there, Jason, if you link it to the explicit teaching. So if your explicit teaching's been about tone, and, whatever you've got them to zoom in on and really try to practice with their narrative writing, then you can kind of guide them, say something I like, and remind them you're commenting on the tone, or have you thought of to improve your tone? And you can kind of give them sentence starters that link to the focus, the learning intentions that you have. Great idea. Would anyone else like to share what they put on the Padlet? Go for it.
This is actually something I've already done. So I'm a VC English teacher.
Yeah.
And we did, as VC English teachers, every SAC we do moderation with a few samples, and I got my whole class to do moderation prior with a practice SAC using rubrics and so on. And that was very impactful because I think it built trust in the system, if that makes sense. They trusted the feedback that we were giving to them and the grades that we were giving to them because they could see the process in action. That makes sense.
Fantastic. And the other thing actually, particularly senior students, introducing them to the idea of moderation does, is it actually really lets them understand the criteria at a different level.
Yeah.
So we were talking about deep investigation or deep understanding. If they're actually having to make a judgment about, have my claims got evidence to substantiate them, it just lets them appreciate it from the other side, which makes it more memorable.
Do you have checklists like that as starting points or prompts like that? Do you do that?
If I had a full-time job in a classroom, I would,
Yeah.
but with the way we work in VHAP, no. There just kind of isn't really the opportunity to do that. But we do work with mentor text, so I might talk through a mentor text, and I might, sometimes collaboratively, what something kind would say about this, what's something specific that we think's been done really well. And I do, particularly with my primary classes, I'll model. So for example, this week I've been teaching positional perspective and kind of evoking setting. And so I really wanted them to practice writing an introduction to a story using the technique of zooming in, using positional perspective, and using focus by putting their adjectives after their nouns. And so I wrote a modelled example for them, and then I gave myself kind, specific and helpful feedback on my piece, modelling it. So I do things like that. It all depends a little bit sometimes of how much time, how much rich conversation there's been about other stuff on the way through, how we adjust a bit. Okay, moving on to section 2, unless anyone's bursting to share what they wrote on the Padlet. The Padlet's there for us all to see later anyway.
Just a quick add in.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking from a junior school, high school perspective, mainstream school,
Yeah.
a lot of challenging students. And it's the obvious question mark, isn't it? What do you do in that context? But it is worthy of note that any junior school teachers probably, regardless of the subject you're teaching, really about working on the culture of the classroom. And so, which is something we should all be doing at the beginning of the year. And I see that the kind targeted specific model, you can build that in right from the get-go and incorporate it with all the other sort of learning behaviours you want to see.
And I think that's when it would be its most powerful. And that's actually, this book, it doesn't cost much. It's about $10. We can probably get it through the supplier that they've got down here. That's basically, if you read this cover to cover and you start 2026 thinking about how, what culture do I want that's actually going to be supporting every kid to achieve at their level, and it's going to honour my work with high ability learners, because that's our focus here today. But really there's tips and strategies in here about what to do to get that culture going. So I'd highly recommend that for you. Okay, we'll go on to the next section, and this is where I have worked really closely with Kate. So Kate, please feel free to chip in if you think I'm missing anything on the way through. So earlier in the year, we're incredibly lucky to be hearing from Morgan Whitfield tomorrow, but she did actually run a webinar for chairs earlier in the year that I attended. And in that webinar, she really stressed, you've got 3 foci, that when you are catering for high ability learners, but really any learners, because a lot of these tips, as you've just pointed out, it's a matter of differentiating how you do these things for everyone in the class. But if we're working with high ability learners, we need to make sure we enrich our pedagogy that it meets them where they're at, and they're not sitting, zoning out and bored as, because there's nothing engaging for them with the level we're teaching at. We need to enrich our curriculum and create opportunity for depth. And we also need to enrich our mindset as the teachers about capacity over ability, about our own capacity, about our colleagues' capacity, and that, it's all about building capacity, building understanding, trialling things. And again, she got me in. I thought she said enough that it hooked me. And I reflected, Kate and I had actually spent term 1 anyway, focusing on deep pedagogy. And lo and behold, she gave me this image in her webinar, which I loved. And so in term 2, I gave my students that image, because I thought it really encapsulated, we're not going for a scattergun approach. We're not going for the first person over the line here, the quickest person to say, I'm done, miss. Okay, we're actually going deep, we're going well, and we want to understand what we're doing. And so I layered this image into work Kate and I had actually started in term 1, because we had a curious mindset together, still on this project of really wanting to see more evidence of really valid, deep application from our 7-8 students in our online classes. And we'd started the year, and we were lucky, we were fortunate, we were timetabled together in term 1, and it let us work sometimes collaboratively, and we met once a week between lessons, took notes, looked at our data, and just kind of layered in approaches. So this is from the work Kate and I had done in term 1, even before I heard Morgan's thing. And, what we had already started working on was we wanted the kids to analyse deeper and better, and examine the dystopian work, mentor texts we were working with more meaningfully than we felt that, we knew we were working with high ability students, but we didn't actually think the work always showed that with what they were giving us in the class. And so we wanted to make them set up the contextual circumstances and the scaffolding that we brought out the deep analysis we were confident they were capable of. We also wanted to, one of the goals of VHAB is to put like students with like students, and that they meet like minds. So we wanted to utilise collaboration a bit more and enable breakout room opportunities. But building on the work I had already started with kind specific and helpful feedback. We wanted to keep that going. And another tip in this book is that your task needs to have meaning and validity. And one of the ways of doing that is publishing it, that it leads to some sort of publication. And so we have had a bit of a culture, particularly with our 7-8 students in VHAP, where they might do a major piece at the end, but they don't want anybody else to see it. They don't want to share it. They don't want to submit it. They don't want to. And so we kind of introduced this notion that, well, when we share our work, it's our form of publishing. Okay, so when in our final 2 lessons, that's us publishing our work. And that means we've gone through the whole process aiming to do something that's the best we can do. And so we kind of layered in that idea, and we both wanted to grow pedagogically because we're both curious to try to be good teachers. And so all this is kind of layered within our curriculum, but it probably hadn't been given these explicit tags. So Kate and I kind of went through, these are kind of the 6 key things kids learn about through our curriculum, but we were explicit about, well, this is what we're teaching you about. So we teach you about setting and world building in dystopian texts. We teach you about the character traits of a protagonist and how you have to actually understand how they act, react and interact based on that setting you're putting them in and based on the other characters that they're going to meet within your text. We also, and they love juxtaposition, it's really interesting, but we were much more explicit about, well, we're doing juxtaposition. We want juxtaposition within our own writing. We want to actually be going through that process of critical analysis when we put text side by side. We taught them, we were already teaching them about motive, but again, we were much more explicit about it. And we were already teaching them about warning and hope. But again, we were much more explicit. And then in all our communication, in all the work we set the kids, we kept going back. We called them the 6 key elements. And so there was that kind of multiple exposures as per the high impact teaching strategies, but kind of tweaked to a high ability approach rather than it being kind of what can sometimes be for them a bit laborious and boring. And so then we are also towards collaboration. One of the things we worked with, and this actually comes up later in the presentation, Sternberg's advice about using real world problems. And we thought, analysing past 7-8 work in our program, we thought one of the things that kids were missing sometimes was they wrote dystopian pieces and they were all full of horror and awful stuff, but they missed the point it was meant to be linked to a real world problem and maxing that out. So we took the time and we got them working collaboratively on Padlets like I'm getting you to do today, identifying, as we analysed our mentor texts, and we had quite a few that deal with technology. Our main mentor text is Hive, that deals with basically keeping the truth from people and suppressing questioning. So we kind of got them to analyse, well, what's the real world issue with our mentor texts? Now, if you were going to produce something, what concerns you about our world? And we got them to kind of brainstorm and share and work together before they locked in the issue that they wanted to work with. And then once they'd done that brainstorming, some of them choosing to want to work with poverty, some of them choosing to want to work with the environment, whatever real world issue they felt passionately about, and they got some good ideas from peers across the 2 classes because we were combining our classes at this stage. Then we said, okay, so now you've got to start thinking about your plot, and now you've got to start thinking about the 6 key elements. You want to work with climate change? What's going to be your setting? Okay, what are you going to do? And then we got them to work, and again, before they've started writing, we're getting them to think through, well, how am I going to use these 6 key elements? How am I going to layer that into my work? And then, again, we looked at their feedback and we got some really affirming feedback from our term working together. I've learned how to be comfortable talking and sharing with my peers and talking about feedback, one of our goals. Okay, I think I did well on understanding the characters more beneath surface level after talking about it in our breakout rooms. Again, reaffirming the time we took to get them to collaborate with each other and think. I'm not going to read them all, but I'll just read one more. I used to think I wasn't a good writer naturally. Now I think I could get very good with practice. So through this intentional teaching, we were developing their self-efficacy and their self-belief that, hey, we can do this. And we're actually understanding how these things fit together. But then I heard Morgan. So I heard Morgan, okay? Kate and I were really proud of what we'd achieved in term 1. And we, unfortunately, timetabling didn't let us be blocked in term 2 and 3, but we've continued to kind of collaborate and touch base with each other right through. But Morgan gave this challenge about deep investigation. And I was thinking, well, that's what Kate and I were trying to do. But from what she said, where are the opportunities to do this even better? Okay, and so then I was trying to layer in the advice from Morgan onto what I thought was already pretty solid work that Kate and I had done. And so what I did, I was explicit to the kids. I didn't keep the fact we were doing a deep investigation secret. I told them that's my goal. And look, if you're a visual person, this is what I want you to behave like. So I gave them Morgan's image. And right from lesson 2, I gave them the 6 key elements, whereas Kate and I had probably only started referring to them as the 6 key elements from about lesson 6. Okay, and so I put it up front. This is where we're going. We're actually going to be layering in each week until we get to this whole. And you're not going to actually start creating until you've done a deep dive into comparison. And so because you really need to be able to identify and analyse this before you have a go at doing it, so that you will be intentional when you get to the creative phase. And so then I layered in, we do juxtaposition. Kids love juxtaposition. Our lesson on juxtaposition is really good. But I had never actually got them. We had compared and contrasted and chatted about different text types, but I'd never actually got them before they embarked on their own creative piece to basically summarise all the texts we'd been looking at and point to the 6 key elements in each of those texts, to be able to see the continuity and the change between texts, to be able to identify the similarity and difference. So I added in this layer, and Kate's built on this again, and she's now made beautiful Padlets with it, with images and things. I just went with colour to differentiate. And, you know, I drew it. It wasn't like I walked in and gave them all this information. Fred, okay, if we're thinking about the real world problem in the last job on earth, what do you reckon it was? Okay, Sally, okay, was it also technology and Hive or whatever? So this whole summary came out of kids' contributions. And I set the bar high. If we're thinking back to Tom Sherrington's advice about high expectations, everybody in this room needs to contribute at least one thing to our grid before you leave today's lesson. Okay? I'd love you to talk because it's actually quicker for me. However, if you don't like talking, you're going to use the chat. Okay? And then sometimes I even get them to then, once it's made, use the, show me what's your thought in here. So that they have to take a colour. I said not asking questions. I can see my work on the collaborative brainstorm. Again, trying to build this concept of contribution. And then Kate this is another text, a beautiful film called Punzi that has definitely got some similarities to Hive. She has kind of built on me doing a grid to then taking it to Padlets. I haven't actually used this beautiful Padlet yet. Kate, how did it go when you used it?
coincidentally, I had only done it earlier this week, and I was very lucky in that the students were unfamiliar with Pumsy, and so they were really engaged from the beginning. And I think they just see that through line, Bron, that you keep, or that you are referencing, where each week we're layering in that new technique, and it's sort of this cumulative effect of them feeling really empowered to deeply analyze the text that we're looking at, and they've got this framework for doing it. So it was great.
Thanks. Okay, I am aware of time. So I'm going to do this one really quickly and then get you to add to the Padlet. The other added bit that I thought I could do better after listening to Morgan was being explicit about working as a disciplinary expert. And we've got excerpts in our LMS where we've got the author of our mentor text talking to the kids. She makes 2 points. She basically made a point about the research, the extent of research she needs to do for her writing to be authentic. Her world is, and her setting is underwater in the sea. And so she said, you know, so I had to read engineering. I had to actually work out how you withstand pressure and things if my writing was going to be familiar. So then I kind of, before the kids started writing, I said, once you've decided on the setting for your dystopian setting, before you even start writing, do some research about it. So if you're saying that your setting is a town overrun by poverty, spend 20 minutes, find 2 articles and read some stuff about poverty before you start writing creatively. So that what you layer in there is going to be authentic. And it's not just, you know how we often get kids going, oh, it was in New York. And, you know, the kids never been to New York and they might talk about the Eiffel Tower, but it's kind of fabricated. I said, you know, we are working creatively, but good writing has research underneath it. And then you play with that understanding from research. And I got some beautiful writing from them from that. And then the other point Bex made was that language is determined by life experience, exposure and context. And Hive actually starts with the first line, we had no word for ocean. Why would we? Because they're under the water and they don't know they're living underwater. And so then we had already actually done this preceded Morgan. But so we set a kind of creative quick write for the kids. Imagine removing another concept from the world. What does that do to the language? What does that do to your experience? So you might have, we had no word for love. We had no word for care. We had no word for fun, whatever. And then just get them to kind of use the prologue as a bit of a mentor text. Okay, if we could add a couple of comments to the second line of the Padlet, how might you try all these approaches? And then if you're keen to share what you've added, let us know and we'll give you a quick chance. I am aware of time though, and I want to make sure I talk a little bit about the section if I don't get right through.
You look like a boat. That noise. I just see you. Yeah.
Could be.
Okay.
Yes.
That's.
We've actually got it in electronic. Does anyone want to share what they put in the Padlet? Oh, then I'll have to flip it back. Someone, yeah. Okay, can anyone share what they've put added to Padlet? We've got shy participants. Okay, well, I won't labour on about it because we can all read the Padlet. So if no one's keen to talk to their point, we'll read
Can I
it.
throw out a question or an idea? So essentially what you're saying is that you use the 6 traits of that text type as a framework for the unit.
Yes.
Yes, so, so therefore, if you were doing a different kind of tech stuff, you would identify different traits and frame your unit around those traits.
Correct.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
With that, can I piggyback that if that's okay? Do you have a document that sort of has that outlined for particular types of texts or like a journey around, like you're looking at like like mystery narrative or, because that would be really great to share if you did.
At this point, no, but it's a thought bubble. Maybe we'll create it in the next
okay.
year. Yeah, good suggestion, but no. Yeah, because it's actually a good tip and it just supports this deep investigation.
And it enables teachers of different abilities and experience to have a framework that is consistent across class while allowing your autonomy.
Yeah, particularly in primary, taking it into the year 7-8 space where we're those good writers and high ability students in the writing aspect, we can really challenge them and take them on the journey that you are. That would be really rich.
And one of the things, we'll talk about this in the panel this afternoon, but one of the things to really be aware of is we've got reading lists in the finale. So primary teachers can take those reading lists and layer in engagement with kids with them. Okay, so the final thing is, and I'm not going to play, there's an embedded video from Hattie. I'm not actually going to play that in the interest of time. So another book that has been a bit of a Bible of mine for about 10, 15 years. It's Hattie's work on visible learning. But he says, you know, what systems and practices can, but reflecting on him, you know, basically we all want to build knowledge. He often talks about the hero teacher. We don't just want one good person. Okay, if I get something, it's my responsibility to try to make sure my whole team get it. Similarly, if someone in my team gets something that I don't get, I want to learn from them. We want to have everybody as accomplished as each other and nobody trying to be, everybody wants to get in Kate Hawke's class because she's the best teacher. We want everybody's class to be equally good and equally stimulating and engaging. And so this is in a bit, again, an ongoing passion project of mine, that my job is to build the capacity of everyone. Okay, my job is to acknowledge where I'm weak, learn from people that I know are strong in that area, and to share in a way, hopefully, that's not threatening what I'm good at, and hopefully infuse and inspire other people to get good at that. And so there's 4 things.
We now like to invite the students to have lunch on the terrace. Lights on your way to the terrace. Vegetarian will be served at one end of the table, with meat options on the other end of the tables. And any specific dietary requirements, please head to the kitchenette and you'll be handed out your. Thank you.
Great, I won't go right through this really slowly, but there's 4 things over the last 4 years that I've really tried to do to encourage building collective capacity and collective understanding. The first is, and stems really back to my chair's participation with Deakin about as a leader, and that was building a culture of inquiry and realising we know what's in our head, but there's always more and we can learn from it. And so initially I kicked that out off with the concept of paper bag book reviews, and there's an example in the folder you've got for that. The other thing was to really encourage people sharing examples of work and commenting on it and being explicit about what that did. Layering in time to consult research and then think about how to use it in our work, like I've monitored with you, like I've modelled with you today with these 2 examples. And then also starting to work at building and sharing capacity and ideas with Happels. And so the rest of the PowerPoint, which you have, basically takes you through each of these and aligns them to Simon Sinek's thinking about the what, the why and the how, and then just illustrates how I've gone about trying to establish this within our culture, and then asks you at the end to reflect on how you might do a similar thing. I've given you all a copy, if you're here in person, of the little booklet we've got to build capacity with other teachers in our school, and I'd love you to think about, and even if you don't do it now, go back to the Padlet and how you might not only build your own capacity, but work to build other people's understanding so that the high ability student doesn't have to get you to be taught well. Anyway, thank you so much for your attention. I hope you've enjoyed it. Bye.
Right, oh, yes, sorry, I forgot the price.
No worries.